And without further ado, today's conversation is going to be around sensitive data in research computing through cloud services. Last month, we heard about the University of Utah and their work on-prem supporting HIPAA-related research services. This month, we have Clifford Kravit, who is a program manager in research informatics at UCLA Health IT. So Clifford is here today. We also have Ken Taylor, who is a cloud architect at the University of Illinois. And also Carolyn Ellis is here from UC San Diego, who is part of an NSF grant that has built an PI who has built the Regulated Research Community of Practice. And she's going to talk about that group and how you can get involved there to learn more. So with that, I want to hand the sharing over to Clifford. Are you all set, Clifford?
I am. I will start sharing. Can you all see my first slide here?
Yes.
All right. So thank you very much. I'll try to go through this quickly because I know we have a couple other people to go through. I'm Clifford Kravit, as was said. I'm with our School of Medicine IT over at UCLA Health as a program manager under our research informatics group. And I'm going to quickly share with you a little bit of what we've built and what we got there and some recommendations that we have moving forward. So I'm actually going to start with recommendations that will kind of bring everything full circle at the end. And if building things out in the cloud, I highly recommend thinking about not thinking about how do I just do things in the cloud, but understand your users, understand their use cases that they're going to bring to the table and the realities that those users have. And that oftentimes relates back to money and learning and change and how that impacts them. So really think about those things moving into it as well. Understand on the IT side what resources you have available. What are the skill sets you have in-house? What are the commitments of those various teams that are going to have to be involved that will take time away from this effort? So really think about those things and understand, and then that will help you in your planning of your implementations. So in the School of Medicine, we actually have gone through two versions of our HIPAA compliant AWS environment. The first one, which is about 5-6 years ago, we built out, was really about getting a footprint within AWS that was HIPAA compliant, just so researchers could do things in the cloud. And the model we took for that was very data center based. It was a central shared account structure in which we would provision servers, just instances that we gave people access to, versus giving them access to the actual AWS account. And while that worked initially and had a number of benefits, everything being very customized, very white glove, we struggled with scaling that out, and we had a variety of other drivers that was really leading us towards change. And that took us into our version 2, where we really wanted to improve our operational efficiencies for scale, being able to get accounts into the hands of the users more quickly, be able to do so with a different team. The team that built the first iteration had been dissolved, and ownership of this service landed on another group. So being able to leverage the skill sets of that team to be able to continue to offer out the service. And in a very more targeted way, some of the things I mentioned, we wanted to reduce the turnaround time to get these things in the hands of the user, get the accounts in the hands of the users, lower the barrier of entry for our users into AWS. AWS is its own language. It is something that requires learning to be able to start using. And so we wanted to be able to reduce that to make it seem less daunting for our actual users, empowering them to build quickly and securely, making sure everything they do by default is going to be HIPAA compliant. And then make sure each user has that same experience. It's not customized for one or the other, where each gets a different type of support. On the back end, we have a lot of tools for that compliance when each new account gets built, that we wanted to be able to do the integration with those tools in an automated way. So really, again, leveraging as much as we can modern methods of infrastructure management, infrastructure as code, DevOps principles, documentation and whatnot. in doing so, be able to eliminate the need for that real deep AWS knowledge and skill by our operations staff, giving them the ability to do things without having to become professional certified. And again, doing it in a way that is consistent and secure, eliminating that kind of room for too much manual error. And of course, because everything is guided by HIPAA in what we were trying to do, we found that leveraging the AWS security pillar of the well-architected framework helped us really reach that level of compliance that we were looking for. So as we built, we worked very closely with our risk and security teams to document everything that was happening and what was being built in a way that aligns with the various areas listed here. So that this is what helped us when we presented to compliance for them to say, yes, we approve. So at a sky high view, this version 2 that we're using now kind of looks like this, where we do have an admin team that does have a bit more of the AWS knowledge to be able to support that backend infrastructure. We have on the opposite side, our operations group deploying new accounts through a service catalog, an operations service catalog that we built for them that doesn't require a lot of expertise on the AWS side. And then the users actually deploying their workloads, provisioning servers as they need, again, through service catalog using pre-configured templates that we've done to account for the majority of the use cases that we've had at the time. So kind of what this looks like in a more network diagram kind of way, I'll take you through from starting more on the left. You see in the middle, there's that AWS master account with an IT operations service catalog. When a new account gets provisioned, it goes through a series of step functions tying in with various artifacts in an artifacts account to deploy those member accounts you see in the middle. And each of those member accounts is tied in with all our shared services. So in a security account, we have tools for vulnerability assessments. We have all our logging going to central log account. We have some other shared services that we leverage, as well as external services like Okta and Duo for authentication and MFA, Prisma for general monitoring of the compliance at the account level. And then everything tying in as far as networking goes through our transit gateway, which links back to our on-premise VPN through redundant VPNs. And we have our authentication also being tied in with our UCLA Health Active Directory. One other thing to note here, in the member accounts, we have budget alarms. One of the big things that often scares people is the theory that somebody will leave something really heavy on and they will end up with this giant bill. So what we've done is, as we deploy the accounts initially, we put in a budget alarm, and it's an amount that we've discussed with the PI before we build up the account to say, hey, well, what's the first alarm you kind of want to go off get by default, and they can actually go in and add new alarms just the way any other AWS account can. So jumping onto that operations service catalog, I'm going to quickly show you, this is what our operations team sees. And forgive me, the screenshots are actually a little bit dated. AWS has since updated the look, but in general, this is kind of what the service catalog would look like for our operations team. You would enter in a name for the account, and then you're presented with a handful of parameters. And these are not very highly technical parameters. This is, general information received in the excuse me, in the customer engagement, and some networking information working with our networking team. And once you deploy, it goes through a success of deploying that stack, which kicks off a process of step functions to start bootstrapping that account, where 90% of the work is automated through the state machine there. And then there's still about 10% remaining other things that we need to do once that's all completed. And this state machine, which call our Christmas tree when it's happy, has all the different templates and configurations and processes that has to succeed in deploying for the account before the account can be ready. So each of the little bubbles there, if anyone's familiar with AWS step functions, represents some sort of configuration, and it, starting from the top, deploys each line in parallel. So initially, this whole diagram is empty. Everything's white, and as it completes the steps, it turns it green, or if it errors out, it turns it red. And when it's red, it doesn't. It just halts everything else. So we're always very happy when it turns green, especially in development, because that was not easy to get to. One thing I do want to point out here is one of the last steps is actually building out our researchers service catalog. So as I mentioned before, we've built out a service catalog which had the majority of the use cases that we discovered when we were first talking to our users who wanted to use AWS. So we have a handful of them. You'll see it on the right-hand side. We have Jupyter notebooks using the AWS SageMaker interface. We have a remote desktop with MATLAB pre-installed. We have RStudio. We have terminal-only terminal-only systems using AWS Session Manager, which is a really nice browser-based terminal that logs everything. It allows us to get away from doing things like jump boxes. And then we have encrypted AWS S3 storage. So for the user's workflow, when they come to log into an AWS account, they would authenticate in Okta for with their Active Directory and MFA, navigate to their service catalog, and then choose any one of the products. In this case, listed here as an EC2-based product, and then hit launch. And behind the scenes, when they launch it, is a full stack of integrations and configurations that, in this case, it was the RStudio one. It launches session manager integrations, logging, permissions within the EC2 console, access for RStudio to log in. Really, I just want to point out that there's a lot that happens behind the scenes that the users don't actually have to deal with. And again, forgive the dated screenshots, but this is the researcher's service catalog. Here's the 5 different offerings. I'm going to quickly walk you through showing what a base EC2 instance is. And that's a command line only option. So when they launch it, again, they're presented with a handful of parameters to fill out. Most of these are just drop downs. They have access to change the instance type, which determines the specs, RAM, CPU, and that is something that they can change later on demand if necessary, which is something we usually recommend, especially for like machine learning. Start out with something small for development, increase it to whatever you need, or a GPU for training, and then bring it back down or turn it off or terminate it when it's no longer needed. So once they deploy, you go through in progress, succeeded, and then you'll notice on the succeeded, this is the service catalog product. There's a terminal session key here, which provides a link. And that link is actually a session manager link that when clicked on, opens up a new tab with Session Manager, which is a browser-based terminal session, works like any other terminal session. You have sudo access, so you can install things on there. If you want to keep a persistent session, you would have to run something like Screen or Tmux, if you're familiar with those. And everything is logged, so our compliance really likes it. The terminate button there terminates the session, not the server. If you actually did want to terminate the server, or that instance, what you would do is come back to your service catalog and go to your provisioned products list. Here I have the product that I just provisioned. There's an actions menu. You would click terminate. And the reason we do it this way is because when you terminate from here, it terminates that full stack of stuff that I showed before, although everything that's tied in with the logging and all those other configurations. Whereas if you were to do this from the EC2 console, it would only get rid of the EC2 component of that. And we don't want to have that kind of drift and all those orphan components existing in the account. So once you terminate, it's done. So with all of that, in addition to accomplishing all the goals we initially set out for, there were some other side effects that we kind of noticed. I'm not going to dive into too much detail on each of these just for time, but I'll point out that for us, there was a maintenance overhead shift that, whereas the initial version, we spent a lot of time with that white glove service and on billing. And with the new version, we put all the building of the actual servers onto the users. They have that access where we can focus on the backend infrastructure a bit more and increasing the amount of resources available and tweaking permissions and whatnot. Some useful lessons and takeaways. Again, I'm just going to list these all out that I had here. There was a lot of lessons learned from here. I want to point out that simplicity, which I think is very key, is sometimes attained through complexity. And this is a very complex multi-layered architecture to be able to provide that easy to use interface. Another highlight, I'll just say code doesn't translate easily. Code that exists in one environment doesn't necessarily mean it's going to just right away exist in another environment. That's not to say you can't take code and reuse it, but each environment has their own nuance. And when working on the project, that translation is just time that needs to be considered. We always think, when is this going to be ready? Account for that time that has to translate that code. And also, infrastructure as code, DevOps, documentation, that creates resiliency. We leverage those methods from the start, and that really helped us as our organization changed. As I mentioned, the teams that took ownership changed. And as we look to keep things building out for scale, doing it in that way has really helped us to create resiliency. And then just general guidance, you can't solve it all. Don't try to build the universe, because it's not going to happen. And think of AWS has already done the universe for you. Understand most people just want something simple. So focus on those use cases, like I mentioned earlier. Focus in on those things. Recognize marketing doesn't guarantee buy-in. You can sell people all day long. If they're not into it, they're not into it. That's okay. Work on what is going to be those use cases that will leverage it. And learn from peers. I love this platform. I love the various places where people are sharing. You don't need to come up with this from scratch. Everybody is doing it in different ways. So learn from each other and work with each other. We're all very friendly. So you reach out to me at any time. I know a bunch of people on this call. We're also happy to talk to any of us at any time. And know that billing takes effort. Billing, it seems like the thing that people often forget about, because AWS sounds like so much of an infrastructure, but billing is a real thing, especially when you're trying to scale. So again, keep it focused. I like to say supplement, don't substitute. You don't have to try to replace everything that you have because the cloud exists. Start thinking again, those use cases. Baseline training will be critical. If you're going to do anything where you're building, you're having people in your team that knows the language, that knows how to use the tools and what's going to be referenced is going to be important. And that's even as it comes into working with third parties. And I recommend people use third parties. You need to have that set of knowledge to be able to oversee the work they're doing, because I've had experiences where third parties didn't work out. And it's because I had that knowledge going into it, I was able to kind of pick out those problems. And again, simplify. Ongoing support comes through simplification. And lastly, if you're going to build, I recommend nowadays use tools. Things like Ronin, also Splite, weren't really available when we started this journey. But in hindsight, if we were to do it again now, we would be using those tools. Again, still leveraging our DevOps principles, recognizing that there is staff turnover, and that's a real thing, especially in today's world where those who have the cloud knowledge are being recruited in one way or another by the cloud companies. So talented resources are hard to keep. And so thinking about when you build, what's going to be most useful, what's going to be most sustainable long-term. Sometimes it's easier to just hire a billing person versus hiring a cloud architect like Ken. So just things to think about. So yeah, I want to thank the team, of course. This was not a single person effort, not even a single team effort. There were a lot of groups involved. We used AWS Pro services to help us in this process, so it's really useful. And I think I came in under time. I tried to rush through this. So yeah, I'm always happy. Yeah, I'm always happy to chat with people and meet even outside of this forum. So yeah, feel free to message me at any time.
Great. Thank you so much, Clifford. That was very concise, and you did a great job of keeping that condensed to less than 20 minutes. Appreciate it. And with that, we have a couple other people I just wanted to introduce, and then I thought we could do question and answers at the end. So I am seeing lots of great questions. Keep them coming into the chat and the Google Doc. And with that, I will give the floor to Ken. Ken, I don't know if we're going to share some slides, but or go ahead and just talk.
Yeah, I've got some slides here. Let me get it going.
Great.
All right.
Thank you, Clifford.
Okay. Oh, go back.
Looks good. We can see your slides.
Great. Okay. Trying to get my screens here. There we go. Come on. Did it revert?
Yeah, you're back in.
Yeah, hang on. Too many buttons to push today. There we go. Okay. Yes. Hi, I'm Ken Taylor. I'm the cloud architect at the University of Illinois. And I'm going to give a brief overview of what we did with COVID and then also talk about accounts. I definitely agree with a lot of the points that Clifford brought up in their way that they're managing their accounts. And so the University of Illinois came up with their own COVID testing system, which is a saliva-based test. Here's some photos, but the big issue was in the background, you have all of these different people doing all of these different steps. And so you've got the sample coming in from a testing location that has to get organized into a tray, that tray has to be prepped. Once they go through the analysis, then someone has to examine the results of that analysis. Plus we have to merge in some outside data to those results because the lab does not have any PII associated with that test. And then of course, all of that data gets pushed down to various other groups for reporting purposes and management if a person had COVID. And this was problematic because we had too many cooks involved and everybody wanted more. And so there was a call to automate this process. So I got a call one day from my manager who said, all right, we need a way to manage all of this data. It has to be scalable. It has to be automatic. It can never go down, and I want it by Friday. So we immediately started building this thing in AWS. And this is what we ended up with. I know this is hard to read at this point, but I'll zoom in here in some of the sections. At the top, we start with the lab. We flow down as we process all of the data, and eventually down below, we do some output and reporting. At the top here, the lab sends us an Excel file that contains 2 worksheets. So even the data within the Excel spreadsheet is not connected. So we have to bring that into an S3 bucket. So the lab actually delivers these files directly to S3 for us. We then kick off a Lambda that converts it to a text file. From there, we kick off another Lambda that merges in all of the data, all of the PII associated with the individual that comes in through the testing site. So that data gets stored in a database. In this particular instance, it's Dynamo, and then we merge that data in. Continuing down, we get to the main bookkeeping part of the process, in which now that we have all the text files with all of the data merged together, now we have to do the bookkeeping of who's positive, who's negative, et cetera. And we've got to deal with a lot of issues here. So we're bringing in external COVID tests, also from a local hospital that does nasal swab testing. And we have the bookkeeping of who we've seen now who's initial positives, who we've seen positive previously, And we have to evaluate all of that, organize it, and then pass on those results. We have a main database also in Dynamo that collects all of that data. So we have about 2.7 million COVID test results now in that database. And then the evaluated results gets pushed down to our local university medical office called, and they have a database called Medicat. And that file is actually uploaded via SFTP into their database. And at that point, we have individuals who will actually make the determination, okay, this person needs to go into quarantine. Then we start fanning out the data to various databases that juggle those individuals. So we have a table that deals with whether or not you're allowed to actually enter a building. So that's the allow, deny access database. We have the testing compliance database in which we're reminding people, hey, you've got to get tested tomorrow. And of course, we have the quarantine, isolate, and release database, which says, okay, you've got to go into quarantine. This is what you need to do next. We actually have the access hooked into the Safer Illinois app. So everyone has the app and they can show whether or not they can enter a building. And we also have a smaller pipeline that then collects information that then says, okay, here are the newest people that we've seen who are now positive. And eventually we get down to reporting. So all of the temporary databases that we have up here are collected together into a reporting feed using Glue. Those files are then collected together into larger files using another Glue job. And now we have a collection of those files that Athena can essentially perform SQL queries across. We hooked Tableau up to Athena, and now Tableau is generating all of the downstream reports for us, as well as dashboards for various people. And so this worked out very well because we could separate out the production databases from the reporting output. So those people who want a report are not hitting our production environment. And that entire process of building this entire pipeline out took about 2.5 months. But the one thing we didn't have was security. So we had to sit down and go through the security process. And hello, here we go. So we brought in a security consultant from AWS. They performed a full security audit. We were looking at making sure that everything was encrypted at transit and at rest. We had to make sure our connections back to the campus were encrypted. MFA is used for all user accounts. That we rotated our keys, and that we started isolating roles for accessing that pipeline based on who needs to come in and actually look at things. After that, I think I missed one here. Yeah. We're also looking at least privilege, making sure that, one process can read from a location but can't write back to it. And so making sure that you have read but no write, and write but no read access as the pipeline is progressing through. Developers were eventually restricted from production access. Code deployment requires some review for management. Everything is, of course, all activity is logged inside of the pipeline, along with auditing. And this was the first time we had to, bring in people who were not HIPAA trained, train everyone on HIPAA protocols, and make sure that they have that background to allow them to be involved in this project. But I wanted to also touch on how we're using AWS organizations to now manage our accounts. And so Clifford talked about his environment. We're using AWS organizations to start grouping accounts according to their use case based on their data classification. We're just finishing up the public data OU. So anybody who's using public data, they can be put into the public data OU environment. And anybody who has restricted data, PII, HIPAA, CUI data, will go into a restricted OU that we're about to start on. The entire process is self-serve. The individual goes to a ticketing system, which is Team Dynamics on campus. They fill out a form with their basic information. They submit that, and our system is then called by the ticketing environment. They pass all of the data, and our system starts a series of step functions that executes within the OU to create those accounts. This is a broad view of how we're looking at our accounts. We're currently working on the US only, non-restricted data. So here's the public data OU that you would land in should you go to that ticketing system. We're going to expand that to include all regions because we have people who are collaborating with people around the world. And then we really want to start on this restricted data environment. We also have some other OUs that we can use for administration, some legacy accounts that we still have left over, and then lockdown should there be an issue with an account. We can throw them in here. It basically shuts down everything and locks the account down. And then we can build out specific campus operations inside of the public data in order to serve those accounts appropriately. But this is turning out to be the non-restricted data and the restricted data. These are turning out to be very important because we just keep getting researchers who come to our door and say, well, where do I go? Where do I start? How do I do anything? We can give them an account, but that account isn't currently being managed. The account is sitting over in legacy, and there's literally not a whole lot except for a little bit of auditing that we're doing and logging in the legacy account. So we really want to go over here and implement those features that will give us that auditing, accounting, management. When an account is in here, we know it's going to be locked down and restricted because we know the data that they're using is going to be restricted to these accounts. And that's kind of where we ended up today. And I know that was a quick presentation. I hope that's sufficient and look forward to some Q&A at the end.
Ken, thank you so much. That was nice to see your specific project on the COVID testing, and then to see that overall architecture design of what you're trying to implement there at Illinois. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And keep those questions coming. And our two first speakers are doing awesome with staying on schedule. Thanks. And with that, I want to pass the baton on to Carolyn Ellis. And Carolyn, did you need to share the screen? Oh, good, you're already there. Great.
Yes.
So yeah, go ahead, Carolyn. And
I'm Carolyn Ellis. I'm with UCSD these days. I did spend a decent chunk of time with Purdue University prior to this, so still new. But what I'm sharing today is I've recently started a grant that is bringing together a regulated research community of practice, and we're referring to it as RCOP. And so the goal of this project is essentially because this is such a small part of each of our world, but it's one of those annoying parts that seems to take over much more of it. And as we're talking about it today, this conversation is taking place in so many different venues around the country, of whether it's with your peers, whether it's with the other people in your job function, but we're all trying to solve the problem from very specific angles. And so my goal with this is to bring together the entire workflow. That includes the export control officers, the labs that are doing the HIPAA research. It brings all through the security professionals in the same setting. So I had this one, and yeah, I'm just very quickly walking you through where the site exists. We're at regulatedresearch.org. And the primary goal is recognizing that probably as higher ed, we lack a voice when it comes to many of these regulations and as they come down the pipe. So we are looking to first establish what our voice is collectively, and then after that, we're looking to get more involved with how can we really start impacting some of these new controls that are coming down. Here's what higher ed stance is on many of these things. CMMC is a big one that I'm involved in. So a lot of this is more clouded with that color, but HIPAA is one that we all are dealing with in a very same manner. The interesting ones I wanted to share was, I put this map together of who I have participating in this community of practice. You'll likely find your own institutions here. It's been growing for a while. And this one's also a fascinating image where I know that there are so many aligned communities and groups that are all working toward similar, like maybe this will intersect with them in a small way, but not completely. Maybe the cyber infrastructure people never are really sitting down with the government regulations people. So it's one of those things where we recognize that there was how to start bringing together the community of the communities. And since it is such a small specific slice, I just wanted to show this visual. I think that really helps. So generally, we're doing the same things that we have some monthly webinars. We'll do mentoring, looking to do something like peer assessments. But we would like to share and promote content from this group. How can we provide this more researcher-focused information back to maybe the people who generally don't work with the researchers? But guess what? We're all in that same equation for the regulated research. So you can subscribe right now. I'm not fancy and I don't have a portal yet, but that does mean you'll stay involved with what's going on. So
Yeah,
that's
thanks,
what I got.
Carolyn. No, that's fantastic. I think we just saw a great that self-service portal from Clifford, and then the specific projects from Ken, and then getting to see more about the community and how people can find more information. So thank you. With that, maybe Christine, I'll hand the mic over to you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your questions in the chat and in the Google Doc. So Clifford, we'll have you go first. So I'll give you choice first. I know you've had a chance to look at the document. Are there any questions that you'd like to address off the top?
I'm actually seeing answers. There's a lot of great questions. The build is actually the one I was just typing. We on the AWS side, we did everything in CloudFormation. We bootstrapped the actual instances with the various agents using Puppet. Again, for that, it was leveraging what our other teams were doing already. So integrating that, but
yeah, if you'd be willing to share out loud answers to kind of the first user questions, like what use cases did you find, what prompted the need, where was the need coming from for this environment? And I think someone had a question like, how many people are converted?
Yeah.
And like pick it up.
Absolutely. So the initial, for that version 1, what kind of got the driver into this, there were a couple things. One, our school was going through consolidation of IT, and found that in the research world, there was a lot of not only shadow IT, but servers existing in random places and data centers all over the place. And so the leadership wanted to take a very cloud approach to solving that consolidation for researchers. The other side of that as well is we started to see efforts from the funding agencies like NIH looking to provide more cloud credits as the means in which they gave the ability people to do compute. So that was very initially what we saw as kind of some of the priority drivers. And as far as use cases go, it was just general compute. We have a relatively new department in our school called computational medicine, and they were looking to use R, MATLAB, and a variety of other just basic types of computing tools for various omic analysis and imaging analysis, Jupyter notebooks. Yeah, so then we went live. The build itself, especially for our version 2, was a challenge because that version 2 started getting built with one team. The team got dissolved, people moved on, so there was turnover. So it was very broken up. So it was hard to get it consistent focus work all in one stream. So it took us about 1.5 to 2 years to actually complete, because there was lengths of time where nothing was being able to be done. So it's hard for me to judge, if you have focus time, what that time is going to be. I will say the work time we spent actually doing shared work time with AWS was invaluable. That pro service group, not just, of course, in terms of them helping to build stuff, but watching how they troubleshoot and how they approach problems, to say, oh, these are areas we should be looking, or this is the best way to solve it. And learning some of those skills really helped our cloud team moving forward for the long term. And we did go live during the pandemic, so we've got now about 15 to 20 groups and projects running in the environment, in a self-service environment, in addition to some groups in that version 1 that still exist. So we have a question about the learning and the education, and that AWS language. With our self-service environment, it lends itself to people who don't know a lot, because once they've been shown how to use it, as well as leveraging, I've written up a ton of how-to documentation to use what we've built for them. That's outside of the AWS mass of documentation that they have. So once they've been shown, it's pretty simple to pick it up. We do have some users that are very knowledgeable of the cloud, and using this environment is super simple for them. And oftentimes they end up looking to do things a little bit using some other resources. And if they're not using data that has to be governed by HIPAA, then we can get them accounts that are just sort of vanilla accounts without all the pre-configurations, without those tie-ins, so that they can build something else.
Okay. So users don't really need to know that AWS, besides the basic, like, I'm going to spin up a server, but they do need to know how to install their own software, for example, so they can build up.
Right, but but the install your own software is nothing unique in the AWS, in this AWS environment.
Right,
so
that's transferable.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, there's more questions, as you saw, but I already put some good answers in. I want to switch over to Ken briefly. I know you answered some of the questions in the chat, but if you could speak briefly to kind of how the process of setting things up, how long it took, and how long the security audit took, that would be great.
The security audit took about 3 months. And so that was relying on AWS professional services, and they did a great job of stepping through all of the software, stepping through all of the modules, making sure everything was appropriately locked down. And it was a great experience, because there was a lot of learning going on, and that was really important. So everyone came away with a lot of understanding. There was the question, do we rely on anything else, any other third party besides the AWS consultant? And no, we did not rely on anything else. We are currently in negotiations to purchase Palo Alto Prisma, and Prisma has an auditing surveying tool that will go through accounts and say, okay, whether or not you're meeting certain criteria for certification, but we do not have that tool in-house yet.
Right, thanks, Ken. And Carolyn, I was just curious, as you started this community of practice, is there any, I don't know, lesson learned or something that's come out of your community discussions that has surprised you or struck you as particularly, like, I don't know, interesting or valuable?
I think the most important thing I've learned so far is that we're all struggling with the same challenges. And we produced a white paper from some workshops last year, but we recognize that pretty much across the country, we all struggled with how are we paying for this? So what does the cost model look like? How are we scoping our environment? How are we handling the training, whether it's of the sysadmins or whether it's of the researchers now affected? Who owns this? What's the governance structure look like? And then how are we handling specific auditing and the controls, some of our interpretations? But we recognize that no, there's a lot more similarities than differences. And that was even came through with the biomedical versus the DoD contracts, that it didn't quite matter how we were securing this research. It was the fact that this is a general ecosystem problem.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And that was a really great list of questions you just rattled off. So hopefully some of that is on the community of practice website for future reference. Thank you all so much. And yeah, thanks for those questions, Carolyn, Clifford, and Ken, for sharing your experiences and trying to answer some of those questions in your particular context. And I'm going to turn it over to Shanna, I think, to wrap us up.
Well, I just want to echo Christina's gratitude for the speakers. I personally have found a lot of the HIPAA compliance issues around creating a computing environment. It's obviously growing, and there's so many different competing understandings of what that means, that this has been very helpful just to hear how some people have been able to navigate this space. So if you haven't signed in, please do so. The link's in the chat. This call has been recorded. We'll be sending out a link in a bit so you can access this in the future. It was very generous of all three of our speakers. So that's Clifford Kravit from UCLA Health, and Ken Taylor from UIUC, and Carolyn Ellis from UCSD. They've all said that you can reach out to them personally if you have any questions on what they presented today, which is very kind and generous. So thank you again for that opportunity. Our next call will be on April 14. Between now and then, be aware that there are some PERC 22 upcoming deadlines. So the short paper submission deadline is on the 8th of April, and poster submissions is also on the 8th of April. We've got the emerging centers call track is the 16th. The systems facing call track is the 17th. There's a link in the chat for an opportunity to vote up different topics that we've been considering for future calls. We're also interested in new ideas. We really listened to that, and especially this little mini series that we've been doing on HIPAA compliance just came out of inspiration from the community and what people have expressed interest in. All right, I want to thank everybody who worked on the call. Justin called us out by name, but if you're interested, if you're like, hey, being on the steering committee looks like fun, please reach out to Justin. We're always interested to hear from new voices, and I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks for coming, everybody.